Welcome back to another Photoshop tutorial, and this time we are looking at an image graciously provided to us by Ewan McGregor's website, and it's going to be about blue screen compositing. And so as we look at this, we're in Photoshop, we're going to kind of see what tools that we need to use and how they can be helpful to us to do this in the best and the most professional way. When you have an image to start off with, and I do recommend taking a look at Ewan McGregor's website. He does have a whole lot of nice high-res images of behind the scenes from some of his movies. And as we look at this right here, I'm just going to zoom into 100%, and we can see it's pretty good. It's a JPEG, of course, and so I'm seeing some JPEG compression, some artifacts right around here. And that's a bit of a bummer. And of course, if you're working on something professionally, you wouldn't really have that kind of stuff. You would have the best high quality images and none of that stuff to worry about. But I think we can work with this. We can take care of it. In doing this kind of the best way, what we're going to do is we're going to obviously not use this entire image. So you have a behind the scenes photo here, and we can see it looks like some lighting on set, and there's some areas where we've got items being covered, got a nice watermark there maybe, and some things we don't need. And we also, of course, have some of these cables that are holding them up. And so the cables would have to get painted out, a little paint fix there. But we're going to work with this image, and we're going to end up doing a 1920 by 1080. So a good old standard HD size. If you can look at our pixel size here, we have 3000 by 2000 pixels. So that's nice. We have a big one to work with. So the first thing I'm going to do, hopefully you've heard this before, is since this is a photographic image, I'm going to come over here to my layer, and I'm going to right click, and I'm going to convert this to a smart object. There we go. So now as a smart object, this photo is protected from anything that might mess it up. So if I were to try and get an eraser and erase on it, I get this. The smart object must be rasterized before proceeding. Rasterize a smart object. I don't really like the options here. Definitely I don't want to rasterize it. I'm going to do cancel, and I wish it would just say no way, never. I'm going to click cancel. So you can't delete, paint on, clone, whatever directly on this layer now because it's a smart object. But we'll kind of get back into seeing how that's going to help us out. But anyway, the smart object means that this is going to be not directly editable. So we have to find better and actually more professional ways to work with this. So as I said, we're going to do 1920 by 1080. So what I'm going to do here is I'm going to go here to my canvas size right here in Photoshop. And let's just take the canvas size, come here you, and we're going to do 1920. And then the height is going to be 1080. There we go, and I'm going to say OK. Great. And so that's our 1920 by 1080 image. And you can see that what we have now is that our photo is definitely too big. But the cool thing there is that I can transform this and take it down. And I probably want to take it down as small as I can get it to have it nicely centered and composed in the frame. And of course, I'm going to transform that, Command-T to transform, or Control-T if you're on a PC. And again, what's really great about this is that because it's a smart object, any transformation I do here is still going to be, it's going to be non-destructive. And that's a big thing we want to look at is non-destructive. Anything you're doing with real compositing, say working with video, whether it's After Effects, Nuke or whatever, it's going to be, the process is non-destructive. And so we want to try and mimic that in Photoshop as much as we can. So for example, if I took this and I said, well, let's kind of take this down here. There's, 70%, will that work? Here's something else to kind of keep in mind. It's that even though this is kind of the top of the image right here, I don't have to put it up like that. Because this is all blue screen and I'm going to get rid of that, I could position this sort of wherever I want to in here. I don't have to be limited by this top bit. I could put this down here and put a new background and do a lot more space here if I wanted to. I'm a bit limited, say, down here, because I don't want all this extra stuff. So at some point, I'm going to have to say, it's going to have to crop here and kind of crop there. I'm going to keep that in mind. But for this top bit here, I can sort of put that wherever I want. So just kind of keep in mind that you have a lot of freedom where you're putting in these assets, and especially on something where, in this case, it's the top, but it could be a side or a bottom. If that's open with your blue screen background, yeah, put that wherever you would like it to go. So in transforming this, I'm just going to size it down to sort of what I think works well here. And I can do, a number of things. I could do it numerically, or I could just kind of grab it from the corners. And of course, you can see sort of by default, the width and height are going to stay the same. So it's going to be proportional transformation or scale. I think for my purposes here, what I decided on was 68.2 or 20%. And so that'll fit in, nicely there, I think. And I'm going to just sort of move it into position so that it works a little better here for me, something like that. Now we need to sort of see the image ends right here, so I'm going to put that over to the edge like that. And so with something like this, I think about, looks good. Maybe drop that down a bit more, something like that. And you can see now I've got some extra that I can work with here and add some sky to it. So I'm filling the image to my edge of my frame right here and giving me some more room here to put some interesting background. And of course, the great thing here is that because this is a smart object, as I take that and look at it again, I can see that the scaling has been non-destructive. If this were not a smart object, if I were to transform again, it would show 100%. But it actually shows me how much I have scaled it down here. And I could scale it back up to 100% and still not lose any information. Now we want to attack this background here, this blue screen, and sort of see how that's going to work for us. So I'm actually going to do that within the original image, not within the smart object here, mainly because the original image is actually a bit larger, right? I scaled it down. And so as you scale things down, it tends to clean things up. So I'm scaling this image down, and it might give me some nicer edges here. So I'm going to open this up, and here's my smart object, and you can see that it's actually full size still. It's at the 100%, and this is kind of what I mean by working non-destructively. The transformation, the scale down, has happened here in the smart object, but the original full-size image still exists. So that's pretty cool. And I would suggest working with photos, this is always a good way to go. So anyway, looking at this blue screen, we want to get rid of this in a really good professional way, the one that's going to give us the best results and also be the simplest to use and the most direct. And so we're going to ignore these other things like, select color range or sky or selected mask, anything like that, and just jump into how this is really supposed to work. Now, just so I can maybe show you here, we want to look at the channels, because any of the stuff that you do where you're trying to tell Photoshop to sort of magically select for you, it's not magic. It's actually using the information there. And so you want to understand what's going on behind the scenes, because you can probably do it just as well, if not better. And that's why I want to come to the channels. So if I look at my channels here, and that's why you always want to have this channels tab, especially as you're doing background removal and photographic work. So we've got this red, the green, and the blue. And for all this type of stuff, really for almost all Photoshop work, unless it's something going to print with the same CMYK process, you want to use a red, green, and blue image. And so seeing how we have this a blue screen background, that probably tells us that the blue channel is going to be very important to us. So as I look at this blue channel, what I can see is there's that background right there. It's all nice and consistent. And the dark of the subject, in this case Ewan and Scarlett Johansson, the dark is darker than the background, but then the lights, these highlights, are lighter than the background. And so a simple selection won't quite do, or a one channel selection. If I look at green, I see, wow, that's some interesting, look, this very black right here, and they kind of pop out against that nicely. But if I look at the red, we have the red's actually very, very similar, but we have some of this nice brightness happening here. And the truth is that when you we want to do a really good background removal using blue, or for more modern kind of digital stuff, green screen, you're going to be using that channel and the red, because in this case, the blue gives us some information that we want, and the red gives us some other information that we want. It's kind of like these brightest areas in the red. See how those really pop out, even more so than with the green? These brightest areas in the red fill in these gaps that we would need here in the blue, in these highlight areas. So it's almost like if we could have an inverse of this red, that's what we would want. And of course, an inverse would look like that. So what we're going to do here is use a very, very old function in Photoshop. It's been there for really almost from the beginning. It's up here in image. We're going to go to calculations right there. And calculations is really built for this exact kind of process that we need. So let's do calculations. And basically what calculation says is there's our source image right here. And we're going to take one channel and combine it with another channel, and we're going to spit out a new channel as a result. And that new channel is going to be an alpha channel. We'll talk about that in a moment. So as I mentioned here, we want to use this blue channel. Now my experience has been when you crank up the calculations here, when it first starts out, you see red and red, and they're combined usually with some kind of darkening blend mode. And so we know that we want, as I mentioned, red and blue. So I'm going to change this red here. It doesn't really matter which one you use, but I'm going to change this one from red to blue. Okay, and yeah, it doesn't really seem to help. But as I mentioned, the red has the opposite or the inverse of what we need. So you can invert any channel you want, and we're going to take this red and we're going to invert it. Wow, okay, now look at that. All of a sudden now we have something going on here. So generally speaking, you're probably going to get multiply. That's what I've seen, and I've done this before, so it's kind of given me my last used one. But you might have multiply. And you can see now that the subject is all dark and the background is kind of bright. And that's pretty cool. And it looks really good right here, right? This white, bright, almost clipped highlight is now black. And what we're looking for is the most contrast between the background and the foreground here to get rid of that. And so this is sort of a recipe, you might suggest. Blue over red and invert the red. If you're using a green screen, same thing, invert the red, but you choose green instead of blue. So multiply is okay. Generally speaking, we want to kind of darken out as we combine these two channels. So if I go here and try color burn, I always try these dark ones here. So that looks really good. I got all this really darkness happening. We almost want to see this sort of silhouette happening. But the color burn gives them a lot of junk right along there, and that is not nice at all. It's even worse than the multiply. And so we just try these other ones here. We kind of want to see what works. It all depends on what your source image is, what colors are in there. If I go to linear burn, there we go. That's going to be about the best end result that we get. So right there, linear burn, it's almost looking like a mask already. And the result's going to be a new channel. And notice how with no effort at all, just a couple of clicks, I'm getting this, what looks like the beginning of a very nice mask. So I'm going to click OK. And what you'll see here is in my channels, I have alpha 1. We've made an alpha channel. It's, again, the calculations has calculated the combining of these two channels and spit out the result as an alpha channel. Now remember, in computer graphics, particularly dealing with things that are RGB, alpha means transparency. And so anything we're working on here, in addition to our color channels, we could have a whole bunch of alpha channels down here. We just have the one right now. That's going to be really for defining transparency. So this looks pretty good, but it's not really done, because what we want here is we want to clean this up, and of course we want to keep this, make sure that black is black, and this right here needs to be white. So what you're looking for with a good mask is you want solid black here, solid white here, and then you want some grays along the edges to anti-alias. Now we can see here is, because this is a JPEG and it has way too much compression, we're seeing some compression artifacts there. And that's a bit of a bummer, but we can work with that. But we do need to adjust this a little bit. And here's the important thing. I don't really care about things down here and down here. I especially don't care about this because this part's getting cropped out completely at the bottom, remember? But anything like this along here, we see like a little bit of that going on inside there. We don't really care about that because we can easily take care of that by making what's called a core mask. We also don't care about junk out here because we can easily get rid of that by using what's called a garbage mask. So we really what we care about is this edge right here. That's where we need this to work. So in order to get the levels we need of black and white, obviously we need, you guessed it, levels. And I like levels because even I can remember Command L or Control L. And so the way to do this here is this shows you the histogram of this channel. And we can see there's a problem, there's no white. Because here's our white, our 255, and it's nothing there. We want to have that here. First we can actually test the black. Here's a black eyedropper. And I can just click here, and I'm pretty sure, but you always want to test and see, yep, that is exactly 0 black. You can't get any blacker. Okay, that's good. So what I do then is I'm going to take my white eyedropper, and I like to start in the brightest areas. It looks like the brightest area is right about here. Here or here. And so if I take the white eyedropper and I click here, it's going to make wherever I click pure white. See that? And so it's taken this white slider and moved it on into there. And we don't really have to guess where that's going to be. This can do it for us exactly. And I'm going to start at this white and kind of bring it out a bit more. So I'll click here, remove a bit more, and click here and here and here. And so that's pretty good right along there. And the thing is, I don't want to go too far. Because remember, between the pure white and the pure black, you need a decent amount of grays for anti-aliasing. We need to have a good edge right along here. And if I take and I crank this too much and make this pure white here, we're going to lose these grays. And so I'm thinking right about now, this is about as close as I want to get. So I'm going to say, okay. Great, there we are. Now, to clean up this mess here on the inside, that's actually pretty easy, and I'm going to show you what I'm going to do there. First of all, I want to make sure that I'm using black and white, pure black and pure white. So I'm going to hit D for default colors on my keyboard. Now I'm going to get one of my favorite tools, the Polygonal Lasso, right there. Most of these other tools are not so great. Polygonal Lasso is great. And here's why. I want to clean up all this stuff here on the inside that's not quite black. And I could grab a paintbrush and paint that. But I'm just going to come along here and I want to make sure I keep away from this edge and select these things here like that. We want to get rid of all that and make this nice and pure black on the inside. Now I need to fill this, and what you can't do is you can't use the paint bucket. That's almost a useless tool, really. And the paint bucket doesn't work because it tries to click somewhere and then fill and stop where it sees a bit of a difference. And so I want to fill this entire area irrespective of what it actually happens to contain. And so you can always go up here and go to Edit and Fill, and look at these options that you see with that. Oh, look at there, you know, foreground color, background color, or even black, white, and 50% gray. These are really important values here. But I'm going to use a keyboard shortcut, and I'm going to use Command Delete, and that will fill with my background color. And that would be Control Backspace if you're on a PC. To fill with the foreground color, which is here white, it would be Option Delete or Alt Backspace. And so now I can deselect that, and I've got this all looking really nice in here. And you want to go through and clean up this alpha channel. And here's an example right here where I need to get rid of that. We're going to paint out this cable anyway. And so just to make sure that I can see where it's going right there along the edge of this collar, I could even click right here on my RGB and see the full color. Okay, I'll get my Polygonal Lasso, And I'm just going to come right here and make sure I go right along that edge like that. And now I can take this full amount out right there. See that? And now I'm going to click back on my alpha channel. There we go. And I'm going to fill this with white or the foreground color. So I'm going to do Option Delete. There we go. Now deselect. So see, I've just kind of taken that part out. What you want to do is you want to come along here and clean up all this junk that you see. And you may need to look at the actual full color channel to check this out. Now notice right here we're keeping things, but look how this part, you know, the blue screen kind of ended. And we have some problems along here because if I look at that, I'm kind of losing all this stuff here. I can't really take this out to pure white because I'd really be losing a lot of what's going on here. I don't want to crush that edge anymore. I need those grays along there. So I could select that bit right here and do, you know, do some more levels control. So let's actually try that. So I might do something kind of like right along here. And so now if I do levels, it's only seeing what is in this selection here. So once again, I'm just going to check and make sure this is pure black. Yep, it is. Grab the white eyedropper, start with the white, and kind of move on up sort of like that. And there's not much more I can do there just because of the JPEG compression and also because it's getting really dark there anyway. So I'll deselect that. But with something like this, what I would suggest is you come along here, zoom in really tight so we can kind of see what's going on, right? And then I would again use the Polygonal Lasso, and you might want to hand paint it too with a brush, but I'm going to come with the Polygonal Lasso and just kind of just very nicely and precisely click along here along this edge. And we can see this is where along the edge here we can get a little bit of some difficulty. So see, as I take that right there, come down, okay, that was good. I'm going to make sure all my default colors, I'm going to fill with black. And then the same thing, kind of working my way around here. Here are some of these cables holding them up. And of course I can, you know, come along here, do something like that, and fill that with white. So what you want to do is you want to take your time making a good mask here. That's I think what's really important. Take your time, make a good mask, and it will really benefit you later on. So you might think, well, I'm coming in here and having to fix these little things. You know, why use the calculations? The calculations and the levels control maybe got us 70, 80, 85% there. And so I really prefer that, and then doing that last little bit of work by hand as opposed to having to kind of do the whole bit of selecting the background by hand. Use the tools as Photoshop has them, and that's what they're going to be for. They're really going to be there and help you. So come along here, fine-tune this mask. Again, you might have to look here, click on the RGB, and see what parts to keep and what parts to get rid of here, and then just make those extra little adjustments. Now to show you kind of really quickly what a garbage mask is, all this junk out here, you know, that's garbage. We don't want any of that. So I could really quickly make a selection out here. Take a look at that. Oh, there we go. And then just fill that with white. And that gets rid of that really quickly. So again, notice I don't really care what's out here. I'm trying to get a good edge right along here between our subject and our background. I'm not showing you everything here, but this is the mask all kind of cleaned up. And, or actually not the mask yet, I misspoke. This is the alpha channel. So you can see I've kind of gone in here and I've had to paint or select out, and there's the heel. And I want all this nice black right inside here. And I need some grays. If I zoom in here a bit, what we'll see is we definitely need some grays along the edges, particularly hair. Hair is a challenging thing to be able to mask out from the background. Now we have also a bit of a challenge here in that for this scene in the island, They were flying along in this flying bike rocket sled type of thing. And there's a bit of a glass windscreen here. And the glass, of course, is partially transparent, translucent, but it's not completely invisible. So in that case, I need to keep some of this this gray right here for that. And so I've painted out all this junk right here. I've painted out all this. I'm not worried about here because obviously we're cropping that out at the bottom. But we need something that looks about like this, right? And we'll make some adjustments if necessary to this later. But if you have something that's not fully invisible or transparent like the background, or not fully opaque like the subject, glass or something, you will need a light gray like that, more than likely. Okay, so now basically I need to take this alpha channel and turn it into a mask for my layer. And the way you do that is you want to load a selection from this alpha channel. Remember, alpha means transparency. That's the whole point of these additional channels in your channels right here. So what's going to happen is that white is going to be 100% selected. Black is going to be 0% selected. And any grays are going to be a range from 99 to 1%, right? And so the nice thing is that there's an option for this right here, and you can see that's kind of why this channel, the channels exist for the alpha channels, is that there's a button here which is load as a selection. Or I like to just hit Command, Control on the PC, right there on the thumbnail, and I load it. Okay, so I've loaded a selection. You can see the marching ants. So I'm going to go back here to click on the RGB. I'm going to click on my layers, and then with the selection active, I will click the mask button. Oh, wait a minute. It's actually masked just the opposite of what I want, right? I wanted to get rid of the blue and keep this right here. Well, that's actually not a problem. All I have to do is just invert my mask. If you look at the properties of a mask, it even has an invert button right there, because that's part of the process. That's kind of how you would do this. Or you could just do now like this, Command-I or Control-I on the PC. So I'll do my Command-I, make sure you're on the mask, there you go, and you've inverted it. And that's pretty good. We have a nice mask, and trust me, this is the best, most accurate, professional, and I think also the least labor-intensive way to make a good mask here. Now, as I look at this, though, I'm seeing a bit of a problem with my mask. There's this blue edge here, this blue fringe or edge, and this is called spill. And what this means is that as we kind of anti-alias from opaque to transparent, or from color to blue, we have this blue kind of filling in here along this edge. And so we need to get rid of that. What you also might see, especially, is that in shadow areas, some of that blue kind of spills in there. I can see some blue right in there. And so part of a good composite is getting this edge to look as nice as possible. So we need to have some edge correction. We need to kind of despill or get this color out of the edge. Now, in a true, say, video compositing program, there are specific tools for that. In Photoshop, though, here's what we'll do that is a good approximation. I'm going to come down to my adjustment layers, and I'm going to choose hue saturation, which is not a great adjustment layer for general photographic work, but for this type of stuff, it's actually perfect, and I'll show you why. The first thing I'm going to do is I'm going to clip it to this layer here so it only affects this layer. Now, it doesn't really mean much right now because we don't have any others, but it kind of becomes an important way to organize later on. So I'm going to hold down my Alt option between the layers, and I will click right there. By the way, any adjustment layer also has its own button to clip it, so I could do the same thing right there. So it's a built-in feature. It's rather nice. Now, here's the important part about this. I don't want to take and adjust the whole image. See, that's the thing with hue saturation, is it's really, these are not great color adjustments. So let's undo all that and get it back to default. What I want to do is I want to see, can I not target everything, all the colors, but can I target a range and only hit this blue color, which is actually almost a bit purple. And you know what? You can. And I'm using the latest version of Photoshop here, 2026, I think, as we speak. It's got some features here that are kind of new, and I had to get used to them. Used to, in older versions, you would find it right here to be able to limit what you target. But knowing that that's an important feature in here, they've kind of put these right in here, which are really nice. The ones that are going to be the most important for us, and see here, this will target everything. There's a full color wheel, is we want to narrow the range. And of course, there's a nice green screen win, but because we're on blue, it's even this kind of weird color of blue right here, I'm going to click right there and click. And look what that does. Down here, we have this adjust selected color range. And right here, it's sort of showing the blues that we're going to hit. What that means is that anything I do here with this color adjustment, it's only going to affect 100% the range of blue right there. And it's going to fade off to 0 there and fade off to 0 there. And so no other hue out here is going to get affected by what I do here. So the first thing I want to do to fix this sort of despill this edge is I want to take this saturation and desaturate that and take it down. And I usually don't go down to 100% grayscale, but pretty far, 90 something. And all of a sudden, wow, look at that. If I take it back up, see that difference there, right? So we're going to desaturate this edge, and that's going to really fix that. It even fixes things right along in here where that blue is kind of getting reflected into the shadows. If I turn that layer off, you can kind of see that really heavy blue coming back. And look, especially here, since we're kind of black and grays, wow, it's blending in perfectly. It's really good. Now this blue, at least the way the photograph came, is actually kind of dark. So I might even take this lightness value, and I hate that term, and I might take that and bring that up a little bit right there, just so that we're kind of fixing that right along in there. Somewhat kind of like that. You see that? So kind of fixing that. And you can see the before and after. And look at the magic right there. Here's the cool thing. These things here where it's not fully transparent, see that glass? That would never work. But as I turn this on, we're removing all that hue from the glass, and it still has a little bit there. It still has a little bit as we're going to see the glass through it from the background, and it's going to obscure it a little bit as if we're looking through actual glass. But that's kind of what we're talking about here. So anyway, yeah, wonderful stuff. As I look along these edges, look at the edge of ScarJo's hair here. If I turn that off, wow, that would never work unless you're going to put her against a dark purpley blue background. But with that, wow, that's some good stuff. So again, this is the hue adjustment or hue saturation adjustment layer. And this is one of the very, very few things that it's good at. And this blue we have here, it's a little bit weird. It's very purple. And so the truth is, if you wanted to make an adjustment here, you could always come here. Remember how I'm showing you right here, it's targeting just this area. And notice here as well, as I took it and I desaturated it and I brought it up in value, it's actually showing that half, like the change right along in there. So it's kind of saying that this dark, very kind of warm blue here is turning into a lighter gray color here. And because this is kind of red, I could even take this little slider here and maybe kind of pull it out a little bit there. What that means is it's going to have even a wider range of that hue, and that's going to affect 100%. And you can see now this is kind of a before and after. This hue bar along the top is the before, and the after, that's what I've done to that blue. So anyway, this is really good stuff here. What's left here on this this image? Well, we've got these parts here of the cable that is in front, kind of like that. And that needs to be gotten rid of. This is what we call paint fix in the areas of compositing. In Photoshop, it's going to be really, really simple because we're just dealing with one image. So get rid of this in any way that works for you. You can easily, grab your clone stamp tool, right? There's my clone stamp. And of course, what I'm going to do here, and let me show you some good way to think about this. Always work non-destructively as much as you can. And so I'm going to not clone here on this, this layer that has the photo. I'm going to click on a brand new layer. I'm going to make a brand new layer, and that empty layer right there, I'm going to clone on that layer. And that way it can be non-destructive. So if I set this and do some cloning, nothing's happening. That's a bummer. Why is that? Well, that layer is empty. There's nothing on it. And this default here says sample current layer. Sample current layer. There's nothing on it. But I'm going to click right there. I'm going to do current and below. And now, if I were to sample right here, hey, there you go. It actually clones out. So this really is the best way to do your cloning or your paint fix, is do it on a separate layer and use this current and below. Don't use all layers, because all layers would include what's happening here in this adjustment layer, and you don't want that. In fact, a good rule of thumb here, and do current and below, is clone it without the adjustment, as though the adjustment layer were not there. And by doing current and below, that's what's going to happen. It's going to ignore this adjustment. So you want to have your adjustment layer on top, your photo layer on the bottom, your plate, and then any paint fixes to that on layers in between, blank layers in between. And you could do more than one if you wanted to. Some of the stuff here you could easily clone out, but some you're probably going to have to go and hand paint and just kind of decide what to do and hand paint on there. And then have your adjustment affect all of them to bring them together. Don't do the cloning on top of the adjustment, because then that hue saturation is baked in. And if you make any changes, well, then you're out of luck. But if it's underneath it, now if you need to make any changes on this layer, it's going to affect everything underneath that is clipped to this main layer. So that is a good working procedure right there. Now for painting, you got your brush, what you're going to want to do here. And sometimes I would clone on one layer, like even take that and name it clone if you want. And then I would also maybe hand paint manually on another layer. Doesn't really matter. But when you do that, what you want to do is use a very, very small brush for this, and use the eyedropper. Make sure, point sample. This is the default for your eyedropper. So I've clicked on my eyedropper. By the way, I love that the keyboard shortcut is just I for eyedropper. You want to take that, and for doing any kind of photographic work, you never want point sample. What that means is any one pixel that you click on, it's going to give you that exact color. But if I zoom in and look at any kind of digital photo, what you should be able to see is that every pixel is a slightly different kind of color. And so to accurately grab a color from here, what I want the eyedropper to do is to do an average. And for most things, I would probably do a 3x3 average. So what that means is that it's going to do a 3x3 pixel square, so a total of 9 pixels. See what all those 9 different colors are and give you an average. And that is what you're looking for. So for any photographic work, make sure that your eyedropper is set to that. If I go back here to my brush and I hold down Alt or Option to pick a color, what it's going to do for me there is it's going to use whatever setting I had here, that average. So I go to my eyedropper first, make sure I've set that right, and then with the brush, I can click and paint, click and paint. What I would suggest that you do is click, paint a little bit, then click, paint a little bit more, click, paint a little bit more, because if you're hand painting anything like this, you want to be able to reproduce what these pixels look like here. With a digital photo, there are not going to be very many pixels at all. They're exactly the same. They're going to be varying quite a bit with this noise, value noise and color noise. So again, do just a lot of clicking around. Click to set the color, paint a little bit, click, paint, and do that until you are done with whatever paint fix you need to do. All right, so this really is not a tutorial about cloning and paint fix, because what I'm going to expect is that if you're doing something like this, you already know how to clone and take out items in the photo that you don't want. But my suggestion for a good workflow is you have something like this. And so you can see I've got 2 layers here. Why do I have 2 layers? Well, I mentioned that before, but I'll show you. So as I turn these off, here's my main layer right here. Here's my plate, and there's the mask. I can, again, always disable the mask and see what it is like that. And I've got one layer right here, which is really just kind of cloning. As I mentioned, I'll often clone on a layer and then maybe do hand paint on another layer. And sometimes I might even come along here and just label that clone, right? You can see what I've done here is I'm trying to cover up this cable from in front, right? And so as I'm doing that, there we go, kind of like that. Just kind of get rid of all this sort of stuff going on. And that does a pretty good job. See all that down there? You're wanting to get it to look as good as possible, of course. And then there's another layer right on top of there where I've actually kind of hand painted. See that kind of hand painting? So in this case, there wasn't really much I could clone from to get rid of some of this. So I just had to put in a layer, and then I would definitely just be picking colors right here from the plate and then painting whatever I thought should be there behind that cable. And I just want to make it look as nice as possible. I'm going to clone down here to at least as far as I need it to go, maybe a bit more. But remember, I'm cropping the image, somewhere like along here, so I don't need to, clone all the way down there. I'm just kind of, and as you can see, what I've done is just to kind of guess and show what I'm looking at here, based on my where I'm going to crop this. I just pulled some guides so I can get some sense of about how far I need to worry about this stuff. But really, the only cables in front were just this one right here. So I'm cloning and painting to get rid of that. And places where I couldn't really clone out, like here's some sort of blurry thing near the camera, that's kind of yucky. And so I just kind of just grabbed here and painted that out really as much as I could. And then of course, all these layers here clipped to my plate. And then with the adjustment layer, that looks really nice, getting rid of all that blue spill. And now we've really prepared our plate well enough. We've done our good background removal. Now the thing to do is just close it. And if you do that, Photoshop should ask you, do you want to save changes? Now remember, I'm not really in the main PSD right now. I'm working in that smart object. And that smart object can have multiple layers. It really is like its own PSD nested inside another PSD. So you can have as many layers and do all kinds of stuff you want. Notice this smart object is acting like its own Photoshop file. It's got a main layer, could be a background, but it's not because it has a mask. And I've got all other layers I'm painting on, and I even have an adjustment layer, so all kind of stuff. So when I close this, I haven't saved it. Photoshop says, oh, do you want to save changes? Well, I usually don't do a save. I just do a close. And then, of course, Photoshop says, hey, look at all the stuff you did. Don't you want to save it? I'm going to say yes. Save that. And then that will update in my main PSD that I'm working on. And this is the process of working with a smart object. You can double click on it. You can edit it and then close it and save it. And it updates there in your PSD. Or maybe you're working on your smart object. You do some stuff. You decide that doesn't work. Close it and don't save it, and then none of that stuff will carry over to your PSD. But this is what you should see right here. And of course, most of the time you're going to want to hit save, and it'll close this smart object. Okay, so we're back into our main PSD here, right? You see that? All the stuff that happened in the smart object is still there. And of course, there's our smart object icon telling us this layer is a smart object. All right, are we ready to really composite now? Well, not yet. Let's take a look here, and I want to double check and look at this edge. Now, we did a whole lot of stuff in the smart object to really fix that edge and make it look good. But let me show you, we can see there's still a bit of a problem right along here. I can still see some of that purpley blue, especially here along Ewan's face. See that right there? Looks pretty good here, but I'm seeing that right there, and that's going to stick out and not make a great composite. You can really see it kind of along here as well. So we have that kind of problem with the interaction of skin tones. So how are we going to deal with that? Well, let me show you a couple things that you can do. Now, notice how this layer has its own built-in transparency. That's because the mask that we made is back in the smart object. And so this is naturally has the transparency there. What you can do, and this seems a little bit weird, but what you can do is you can actually load a selection from this layer's opacity or alpha, right? So if I command click or control click on PC, notice how we see that little marquee there by the cursor. So I'm going to click that, and it's going to load a selection. Again, what's 100% selected will be 100% selected, 0% selected, 0, and then the kind of gradations in between. So if I load a selection with that, I can actually make an additional mask here. And so the 0% selected is going to stay the same. The 100% selected is going to stay the same. But where it was anywhere in between, it's actually going to carve away a little bit more. And let me show you what I mean by that. So right along here, if I see that, if I were to disable this mask, and you can do that just by holding Shift and clicking it, you can see that it's kind of trimmed in a little bit of that edge of the mask. This is what we call choking the mask in compositing terms. And so it's actually cleaned it up a little bit as I do that. And of course, we don't want to lose too much here, but we do really want to take care of that edge and get rid of it. And so now that I have a mask here on my image, which is already masked, and again, I'm using Photoshop tools for this. If you're using an actual compositing program, it's got very specialized tools for it. But I'm using Photoshop tools for it. And with a mask, I'm going to show you a really, really important feature for this mask. There's a pair of filters that's really designed just to deal with masks. So if I Option or Alt click on it, I can see the mask right there, right? We see that. There's my mask. And you might want to do something where you fine-tune this edge. We've already talked about choking it, and we kind of visibly have done that just by putting an additional mask edge on there. But the mask is the same. And I want to tell you that you can choke or expand a mask. And Photoshop has filters to allow you to do that. That's really kind of all they're supposed to do. Now, I've never come across a situation where I really wanted to expand a mask. I'm always wanting to choke it because I'm trying to get rid of this spill along the edge. And so let me show you the filter that's designed for that. Make sure you're selecting the mask here, not the layer itself, but the layer mask. And come up to Filter and come down to Other, and you will see Minimum and Maximum right there. This is exactly what these are designed to do, and from what I can tell, the only thing they're supposed to do. Maximum will expand the mask, which, again, you don't really want that I can see. Minimum will take and choke it or contract it. So I'm going to make sure I click Minimum. Also, make sure that I've got the mask selected, and so I will click Minimum. It will actually show me what's happening with the mask right there. And I think it's actually very handy to be looking at your pixels, your image layer, but have it on the mask. Of course, you have to have it on the mask, because then what I can see here is I can see how much it's affecting that edge. And there are two options here. We can preserve squareness or roundness. That sounds kind of weird, but watch this with squareness. As I take the slider, it goes up in whole pixels. Now, obviously, that's awful, right? We can see what it's doing. It's actually taking the black part of the mask and sort of expanding it inward, or actually, just the opposite. It's choking it. And that doesn't work really well at all. And of course, the thing that's really not so nice here is it's happening in whole pixel values. And it's like, well, 1, I don't know, 1, that's not bad, but is that too much? If I could do it less than a pixel, that's really what I would want to have here. So I'm going to change it from squareness to roundness, and then I have 1.0. And so with that, notice how you can move it in tenths of a pixel, and that's what you want. So the idea here is you want to take and choke this mask as little as possible, because remember, as you're doing this, you're actually kind of eating away your image, and so it's a bit of a balance. Take it in as much as possible to get rid of that bit of spill happening, but then do it as little as possible so that you aren't losing important details, like stuff along here. So I want to look at these important edges, and of course the preview here is very nice. And so I can see just kind of what I'm losing as I do this. And so you really are trying to do it not much more than a pixel. Very often it's less than a pixel will really get you what you're looking for. 1.5, 2, 3, that just basically means you haven't made a good enough mask to work on. This is a really tiny fine tuning. And you want to have it less than a pixel, or if you have over a pixel, just not that much, because you can kind of see what it's doing to the edge there. So I might lose a little bit of info, but if I'm getting, when I say info, I mean visual data, right? But if I'm getting rid of that, yucky blue spill, that's kind of what I want. So you see right here what we have is you want to do that just enough to make it work. And so the minimum filter is very, very important. I can't ever, at least for compositing, can't say that I've ever seen the need to expand the mask or use the maximum filter. But the minimum is so helpful and important because we want to move that mask edge in. And again, this is called choking the mask. So you can look at the whole thing right here and just kind of see how that looks. I'm losing a little bit, but losing a little bit of hair detail can be okay if I have a nice edge right here. So what you want to do is, again, choke that mask just enough to get rid of that last little bit of that blue, if it's there. Okay. Now, one more thing I want to show you, and this can kind of help with compositing, is this is really cool. Sometimes you might need to blur this edge of your mask. Especially as we work on this a lot and go through a lot of steps and maybe do a lot of levels and stuff, the edge sometimes can get a little bit too crisp or harsh. And a long time ago, what we'd have to do is, click on the mask here and do some type of blurring filter. And of course, that's a destructive edit. What's really awesome, and this has been in Photoshop for quite a while now, is that if I click on the properties of a mask, you can see that it has feather built right in. And that's really about the same as blur. And I love it because it does what I need, but it doesn't do it destructively. So sometimes just to kind of clean up some of these edges that might be a little bit too harsh, and of course right here with the JPEG we're starting with, that may contribute to that. But if I take this feather and I just pull it up a little bit, and you don't want to do this a crazy amount, but just a little bit there to kind of soften the edge of that mask. See what that's doing right there? I can kind of soften that edge a little bit. And sometimes you don't really know if you need that until you actually get a background being put in. But that's kind of what we're looking for, is to soften that edge if necessary. So if that happens to be the case, if that's what you need, just remember, click on the mask and look at the properties, and there's the feather right there. Okay, so we've done a lot with looking at the mask and working on a mask. And when do we actually get to the fun part, some actual compositing? Well, let's try that about now. So we've got our foreground plate. Now we need a background plate. So I'm going to open up an image here. Just pick a background. And the one that I'm using here is I just got a background image that shows some sky and some buildings. We'll take that, open that up, and there it is. It can be really sort of anything as far as what type of look you want to have for your background. And let's just take it and drag it in and drop it, and of course put it below. There we go. And now when I've done that, I can take this image here and close that and work along with this. Okay, so there we go, right? I'm actually doing a composite. This is like an A over B, basically. Foreground, background. Simple, right? Well, not really that simple. There's a lot that has to happen here in order for this to look good. Now, again, because I am working with photo, just to make sure that I work in it with a good framework, good methodology, I'm going to right-click and I'm going to convert this to a smart object as well, because there's no need really to do anything destructive on this photo. All right, so with that at the background, now that it is a smart object, I could scale it, I could do all kinds of things that I want. And of course, notice how I can kind of place it into position here. And this is where I'm actually doing a bit of compositing. I want to kind of see what I feel works together with these images. Now I can see some big problems right away. And one is, of course, the amount of blur happening. And also the big thing is going to be contrast. So all these things we kind of want to think of. We really want to work together, and it can be, whichever way you want to go, which one you want to tackle first is just fine. But I think what I want to do is I want to think about this background photo. I want to do a few things here. I'm going to zoom in, and I want to look at whenever you're doing a composite and you're bringing in various elements. This applies to a still like this, or even to video. You want to look at your various elements and see what they need to do to match. Really, you might have things that are different quality. And oddly enough, you're going to look for, say, the lowest quality of the elements and sort of dumb everything down to that. So you can't really take things and, I think, effectively remove blur or remove noise or junk like that, but we can add those things. So anyway, here's my plate. And honestly, even professional film plates do tend to have a lot more grain and stuff in there than you might noise than you might expect. And so I can see a lot of grain or noise here, and I can see the amount of blur right here. And I want to kind of look at my background plate I'm putting in, and I want to make them match. That's really the goal of compositing, so that these elements really look like they all fit together. The one thing to kind of keep in mind here from a very cinematic point of view is that if I'm in kind of a close-up right here, and this isn't a close-up, but maybe sort of medium shot, it's very likely that the background is going to be a bit out of focus. And so the closer you are in usually to your subject, the more out of focus your background would be. And if you have something where this is kind of, a bit more farther away than this mid shot here, they both might have the same amount of focus. But I want to give this one a bit more focus right here, my background plate, and I want to do something to really, really add something cool to this, and I'll show you what I mean there in a minute. So with this right here, what I'm going to do is I'm going to go up to my filter and I'm going to blur, and let's not go to the Gaussian blur because that's not really good. What I want is a lens blur. But here's what I don't understand, and after all these years, I'm still frustrated by this. Because this is a smart object, out of all the blurs I have, the one I really want, lens blur, Photoshop's not letting me do that. So for some reason, it doesn't want to do a lens blur on a smart object. If this were a normal pixel layer, it would do it no problem. So if anything, I think as far as what they should do to improve Photoshop, items to put in, forget all this generative AI crap. We could use some useful things like this, being able to do a lens blur on a smart object. But since I can't do that, the next best thing actually, I'm going to come down to Blur Gallery, and I'm going to do what's called an iris blur. And so I'll show you how this is a good way to go. So if I click right there, it's going to sort of open up this almost like a little program within a program. And the iris blur is actually really cool because what it'll do is it will give a simulation of depth of field. And the type of blur we get out here is much more accurate to being what a camera blur would do, much better than, say, a Gaussian blur or anything like that. And here's how this works. It starts with this point right here, and I could add additional ones. But right here we have zero blur. See that right there? Put that right there. zero blur right there. And then at this point here, it starts to blur. And from there to there, there's the final amount of blur. So we have this kind of gradation or fading of blurs. In this case, this default, I think it says 15 pixels. And so you can see how blurry that makes the background. And it's actually kind of cool. It's sort of cinematic here. What this would simulate is if I've got the camera focused on something, that gets to where it's in focus and it'll gradually fade out and be out of focus. But because this whole background here is going to be all the same amount of focus, say it's infinity or something, I don't want to do this gradual blur. So in order to sort of get away from that, what I can do is I can move this little widget around. I can grab the edges and pull them in and make it even smaller. And then I can even take it and put it way down here. Well, now the focus part is going to be behind my foreground. And so now the whole thing has the full amount of blur. And it's going to be uniform. Now this 15 is way too much. So I'm going to crank that down maybe to something like 4 pixels. So it's just a little bit less in focus than our foreground here. And that'll help give it some distance. And you can also change that with this little item here. Again, there's the origin of the focus. You can kind of grab right there and change the blur as well. So there's my 4. And so 4 pixels. So when you like that, you can say OK. And now you're back in Photoshop. Now, obviously, if these guys are whizzing through the air on this rocket cycle, whatever it is, and we kind of have that suggestion going because we've got some wind blowing in her hair and Ewan's all serious and squinting for the windshield. We want to have some motion blur in this background here. So that I think is going to be really helpful to make it kind of sell what we're trying to do. And that's a simple thing. We should know this from Photoshop. Blur, there's our motion blur. So let's click on that. And there we go. Again, this angle of 0 is fine. So we're going to suggest that they're just flying along horizontally pretty much. And so the camera's on them while the background is whizzing past. So we want to have enough of that to make it seem like that's what's happening. I think about 30 pixels. And what we can see is, yeah, look at that. There we go. So now we're blurring that background so that, it's going to look right. So now we get the sense that there's some speed going on. There's some movement, and this is what the motion blur is good for. That background is blurring away, and of course we can do some ridiculous thing. Now that the more I blur it, the faster they're moving, right? But we want to make it still be visible and understandable and somewhat realistic. And so for this one, I'm going to go again with about 30 pixels, and I think that does it for what I'm really looking for here. And then say OK. Now again, because this is a smart object, I can see those 2 blurs there. First is the blur gallery with that iris blur to give it a little bit of out of focus like a camera. And the next one is the motion blur on top of that. And as you add filters, one builds on top of the other. So in this case, this is what I'm looking for here. And we're working toward this composite. But there's a lot more we need to keep into consideration here as we're doing this. We should probably now start thinking about value and also, where we want this image to be. Again, because it's on a separate layer, I can kind of move it around and just sort of, there's the edge right there, so I can't really go past that. But notice how because it's larger than my 1920 by 1080, I can kind of move it around and just sort of see where does it look good. So we've got that, but the real problem here is that we've got to take into account our values, right? And get some correct depth going. And with our initial image here, our initial plate from the blue screen, we don't really have strong black levels. If I were to click here and just say, well, what's our black? I mean, they're since they're both cool and hip characters, they're wearing black head to toe, and then I've got black shadows. Well, look how not black that is, right? If the value of black is going to be a 0%, this is a 13. And I'm thinking right here these shadows really should be pure on, full on black. What that means then, especially with this light all around, is that nothing in the background should be as dark as what we have here. And this is an important element of compositing to make all your assets you're putting together look like they fit together. So I've got to adjust the values to darken up areas here in this top layer. And I've got to adjust values to brighten up and maybe reduce the contrast in this background layer. So in trying to get our value problems corrected, let's start here with our foreground plate. So I'm going to add an adjustment layer. I'm going to do curves. And again, make sure I clip it right here. I can, of course, option click in between the layers or even right there, of course, in the adjustment layer. And so zooming in a little bit, this is probably one of the best ways to do color adjustments. And if you haven't really dived into that, this is the time to do it. So what we're seeing here is this is a histogram showing the values in the layer. In this case, it's not the entire image. It's just this layer because we've clipped to it. And this tells us that we do have some spikes of white right here. See that right at the very edge? I'm guessing, of course, that's going to be right along here. And then we have no pure black. We can see there's a big spike of fairly dark, which I'm going to guess is, of course, all this stuff in here. Now, what you want to do is you want to make sure that you have this button here selected. And it looks like a hand that's upside down with a pointing finger. For some reason, upside down. I don't know why. But that is called the targeted adjustment tool. And so I click this option here for my curves. So to check it, that means anytime I go to curves, this is already selected. Here's what that's going to do. I'm going to come over here to what the darkest shadows are. And of course, again, as I said, these are hip, cool young people, and so they're all wearing black. And the darkest shadows are going to be the shadows on the black, right? So here or here or here. So if I just, with this tool selected, come over here into my image, it'll give me an eyedropper. And if I click right there, that will put a point right there on the histogram, meaning that those are the values that I'm controlling. And so this straight 45-degree line means that there's no change from the original values. And if I were to move this point up, it would make that part right there brighter than what it was initially. And if I move it down, it'll obviously make it darker. And we kind of see how this goes. And this is why this is called curves, because you'll end up with some type of curvy line here. And you don't want to move this point here left or right, so I always do this with the arrow keys. And so I want to darken these values right here, and I don't have to guess at where they fall in the histogram. This tool will target it right there. And so that is an accurately placed point. Now I'm going to hit the down arrow on my keyboard, and I'm going to move that down, kind of like that. And we probably don't want extreme pure black, but something that kind of looks good here. And you can adjust this. Now, if there's anything else going on here, like if I felt that some things here were perhaps getting a little bit too dark, I could come here and say, yeah, these values in the flesh tones are getting a bit too dark. With the same tool, I can click, and you can see how that puts another point on the curve. And then with the arrow key, I can just move that up a little bit. And as long as it's below this 45-degree straight line, you can see the line still exists, so you can see your curve relative to it. I know that I'm darkening that. And if I were to put it right on that 45-degree line, it would be the original value. And if I put it above, it would be brighter. See how that works? This is a really great tool. It's probably the best, most precise and accurate and professional tool for getting color and value adjustments here. And if you, for example, very simply, if you wanted to increase contrast, you would put a point down low here and a point up high here, move your lower point, your dark values darker, move a point here with your brighter values higher, and that would increase contrast because you're brightening your brights and you're darkening your darks. Just for the opposite, if you want to decrease contrast, you would take your dark point and move it up to brighten your shadows or your darks, and take your highlight point and you bring it down to darken the highlights, and that would reduce the contrast. Now the important thing here is you want to make sure that this curve, for the most part, is fairly smooth, and it should always go uphill as it goes from left to right. If you get something where it starts to plateau or even go up and down, you're going to have really, really weird, unnatural looking results. And you don't want that. So in this case, what we have here is just a little bit of adjustment where I'm darkening things as they should be. Overall, I'm kind of darkening stuff. I want to make sure I'm not really brightening or darkening anything here. And so look at, as I move my cursor right along here in the bright highlights of the hair, you can see that's way up there and it's not really going down any. But if I wanted just to make sure, I could sort of click maybe right along in here, click, see where that is there? And just with a couple of taps of my up arrow key, kind of move that back into place. And so now what that tells me is that I'm doing most of my darkening in the darkest areas and a little bit around here and taking it back up to no change up in these brightest areas here. And this is only something you can do with curves. Levels can't give you this amount of control. It'll kind of darken overall or brighten overall, but you can't fine tune this with this kind of accuracy. And just forget about something like contrast and brightness. You should not even pretend that's there. It doesn't exist. It's not a good tool. Okay, so what I've done here is I've adjusted the values here so they work a little bit better, because obviously we want our darkest values, our most contrast, to be here in the foreground. And I can even click back here in this point right there, and I can even move that down a little bit more if I want that a bit darker. Okay, we're all good. Now something else that we can do is that we can use the curves to do color adjustments. This is mainly a value adjustment. See how I've adjusted contrast and values? But we can also do color adjustments with this type of pinpoint accuracy as well. And that's going to be a really big part of compositing, because there's an overall color cast here, and we need to match our foreground and background. Now we've removed all the blue, remember all the steps we did there? So that's good, but still we have whatever sort of color cast and temperature and all that's happening with this photographic plate. Now remember that what should control overall what the what your colors are and how that looks should be your background. And this is mainly going to be sky. So the colors here, the overall values and all that should really control what's going on here. And so the sky is obviously very red and kind of blue. See how purpley things are? Look at this building here. Now I'm sure this building is not actually purple, but it looks that way because of the colors in the sky. And so we want to do the same type of thing here. What I'm getting in this raw photo from the blue screen is by contrast, I'm getting a lot of green happening here. And you might not think it's green, but all this yellow, see how yellowy the hair is? Very, very yellow here, and the skin tone is very yellow. And you even see that kind of right here in all these blacks. And we need to make this match. So what I want to do is probably bump up the red and the blue on this layer so that it more matches my background layer. And the way you do that, notice that by default the curves says RGB, meaning it's affecting all channels. So if I click that, I can adjust and do a curves on each channel individually. So I'm going to go red, and look, we have something really fancy here in our very latest version of Photoshop. As I make this, they've added something new with this little funky red gradient. And of course the line here was always red, but they've made the whole histogram graph here red, so there's no confusion, I suppose. I've still got the same tool adjusted here, or selected, and I'm going to come here and pick somewhere around here where I want to put a bit more red. So if I just click kind of down here in the blacks, click that, and it puts that red point there. So again, just like doing a value adjustment, a color adjustment is going to work the same way. I'm going to, with the up arrow on my keyboard, move this point up. And as I do that, I'm getting a lot more red happening. We see that there? And so colors like black and this gray, which of course are very neutral in and of themselves, should start to take on a color cast of this environment. And so as I do that, I'm getting certainly more red happening there, and that's cool. That's all nice. Maybe even a little bit more will work. Okay. Now let's try some blue. Come down here, grab a little bit of blue, and the same thing. Oh, and look, we have blue to yellow, and that's interesting. Let me go back here to my red, and actually we're kind of getting sort of a red to cyan. And maybe they're not just trying to make this look kind of cool, but what they're saying is with a color balance, as you go this way, you're going away from cyan and more towards red. If I were to go the opposite, I'd go kind of more toward this cyan here. With the green, we have this sort of magenta color. That's the opposite of the green, right? And so with blue, the opposite is going to be yellow. So once again, I'm going to come over here. I'm going to pick a color kind of in these, darker areas here. And it's all kind of in the same big spike of where these very dark shadows are. Somewhere along here. And I'm going to move that up to a bit of blue. Okay, so just a little bit there. And what that's done is it's given everything here that is very neutral. Again, black leather, black jeans, black cloth, dark gray, metal, all this. It's given that it was very neutral. Now it looks a bit more kind of purpley. So if I were to take this off, let's see the difference. Wow, see the difference? Then that's a value change, but I'm losing that color cast as well. So I put that on. Now we get some of these, warm reds and purples, and that really helps this foreground plate to match that background plate. So I think for now, we can call that done. But let's do a little bit of adjustment here on this, this background plate. So we don't probably want to change the color too much because I like this color. It's got some beautiful pink to purple values or hues happening there. And so I'm not going to change that. And again, I've tried to adjust my foreground plate to match it, but I do want to adjust its values. So I'm going to come over here once again and add the curves. And I don't really need to, but I am going to clip it. So again, it's affecting just that layer, even though at this point it doesn't matter. And once again, with this targeted selection tool, I'm going to come over here. You see what's happening here with this is that this histogram is showing me this particular layer. And we can see there is a decent amount of pure black right there on this layer. We can see there also is a little spike of white, which I imagine could be around here or a little bit of that going on. So I want to come, and maybe I want there to be nothing in my background that is pure black. Because I want this value, these shadows here in the foreground, to be the darkest bits, which means that it should not compete with this. So for that, I actually don't even need to pick from my layer. I can just click on this very final point, which is pure black. I'm going to click right there, and I'm going to move that up. And as I do that, you can see what we're doing here is we're actually removing these darkest values. And so what that means is that there is no pure black value at all. See how I go from there to there. I want my darkest values to be right here in the shadows of my foreground. So I'll move that up a little bit, kind of like that. And we'll kind of see what it looks like before and after. Now you can see what happens with that a little bit because it's brightening everything. I don't maybe want to brighten right here. I just want to get rid of these darkest values that are happening right here in this background. But maybe I don't want to lose this kind of nice contrast I have here. And you can see what's going on is it's going up above this 45-degree line. So I'm losing a little bit of value here. So if I click right there, see that? I can actually take that bit and move that back down. So now this part here doesn't get any darker. It's going to stay about the same. But these darkest values will get darker. And you can only do that with curves. Levels just can't give you that type of precision. It's either darkening or brightening, but not both. The cool thing with curves is curves will do both. I really do like that. Again, because these are adjustment layers, I can fine tune that and it's all non-destructive. I do like to see sort of the before and after right there. And that looks pretty good. So what I see is that I've got some nice, really dark areas in the shadows here with my foreground. Again, not quite pure black, but pretty close to it. And I've got nothing quite like that here in the background. Again, if I think, I'd like to darken this just a little bit more, maybe get closer to black in some of these areas, I can once again come down here, and I've already selected the point. I mean, it's already been chosen and put on the curve. I don't need to reselect it. I can just click that point here, and again with the down arrow on my keyboard, move it down just a little bit more, and now I've darkened these a bit more. We don't want too much pure black because there's a lot of nice detail in these shadow areas, so we don't want to lose that. Okay, so as I look at that, and I'm going to compare and contrast what I have now with my foreground background and what I had before. See, this is a lot better. These two layers now look like they belong together. I'm starting to believe that these two people here could actually be in this background environment. But there is more to do. As I'm considering my colors once again, one thing I'm seeing is that these colors here of Ewan and ScarJo, they kind of got a little bit saturated. And as you pump up the contrast, which I didn't touch the brights, but I did darken these shadows here, that can kind of sort of oversaturate your colors. So keep that in mind. Now, I don't really mind what's going on here. I think it's okay. But as I compare it to my background looks a little pale, a little desaturated. So what I think I'm going to do is I'm going to add another really simple adjustment here to the background, and I'm going to do vibrance. Now, I've got to kind of remind myself about this. This is a brand new thing here with Photoshop currently. And it used to be vibrance kind of down here. Now it's actually color and vibrance because we do have some additional controls. So I'm used to just vibrance and saturation here, but now we also have temperature and tint. And that's kind of interesting here. And so you can see what's going on here with this. Really, all I care about for this point is just vibrance. And so I'm going to take it here and, oh, look, that was in the wrong place. Let me drag it and put it right there because I'm trying to increase the vibrance of my background, not my foreground. And once again, I'll clip it and just take the vibrance up here for a bit. I'm just going to see what that does. Something like that, not quite 50% maybe. So look at that. It's really given some great color there. And it's not too over the top. But this is a beautiful sunset sky. And it really should be nice and vibrant and beautiful. Remember, this is, for all intents and purposes, this is the light source for the scene. And so we need to have a lot of sort of luminosity and saturation and all that from this light. And that's just going to help overall bring things together. So speaking of bringing things together, as I zoom in here, I've talked about this before. Look at the amount of grain happening in my plate here. And we can see 0 happening in the photo. Now, all digital photos are going to have some type of grain. And I'm imagining this one did initially. But because of all the blurs that I've put on it, what you can see is that there's no grain. And so this is another part of compositing that's really important is you need to match the grain. And as usual, look at the areas that have the most grain and match everything to that. You're kind of like dumbing it down, so to speak. And so it's easier to do that than trying to remove this effectively. So even though this is blurred back here, imagine the motion blur, there's still going to be grain because that grain doesn't happen here. That grain happens as either the light hits film in a real camera or the light hits the sensors in a digital camera. That's where it comes from. So I need to add some grain right here. Now, there are various ways that you can do this, but I'm going to show you a technique that I've developed and I think works really well. And of course, I could come to this layer right here and I could do a filter and I could add noise. So you have this right here. And then also in some of our filter galleries, we have film grain and things like that. But I want to do it separately from this because I want to be able to control what I do here with this noise or grain that I'm adding and have that be separate from my background and these blurs that I have going on here. So here's what I'm going to do. If I make a brand new layer here, there's my blank layer, I want to add my, let's just say noise on this layer. So if I do that, I say filter, oh look, noise, and I'll add noise. the selected area is empty. What that means is that the filter noise, add noise, cannot do it on empty pixels for some reason. It can only do it where there is existing colored pixels. Transparent ones won't work. So this won't work at all here. That's kind of a bummer. However, let me show you a way around that. Instead of making a new layer by clicking the new layer button, I'm going to hold down Option or Alt and click it, and I will get this right here, new layer, and it will give me some options to choose here. You can also get the same thing by going up to Layer and New right there, and the same thing, we get this, right? So whichever way you want to do it. So what I'm going to do is I have to fill this layer with some pixels in order to add the noise. And so if I think about, well, I can tell it what blending mode to be before I do that. And just think about this, plan ahead what you want to do. What do you want your noise to do? Do I want my noise to brighten my background? No. So I'm not going to really think about these brightening blend modes. Do I want my noise to darken my background? Well, no, not really. And so that means these blending modes aren't going to really work either. So in addition to your darkening blend modes and your brightening blend modes, you have what we call the overlay blend modes. And these will both brighten and darken. And so that should cancel out so it doesn't really look brighter or darker. Notice how right here, the noise on Ewan's face isn't making it look brighter or darker. It's just there. So I'm going to click Overlay. Now look at this right here. Fill with neutral color. And it even gives me a little color swatch. That's interesting. If I were to choose Multiply, fill with neutral color, oh, now it's white. So basically what that means is that these blending modes have colors in which neutral is not a good word for it. That's Adobe speak once again. What that means is these are colors that are going to be transparent in that blending mode. And so with overlay, or any of these modes right here, notice how they group them up very nicely. Any of these overlay blend modes, 50% gray is going to be transparent. So I'm going to click there to fill it with that color, and then I'll say OK. And now you can see I've got a layer which is filled with gray. I don't have the, the checkerboard transparent pattern on this. It is gray, but you can't see it because of the blending mode. And with that, I can actually add noise to it. Even though you can't see the pixels, they're still there. So this is a great workaround if you have a filter that requires opaque pixels and won't work on transparent ones. But again, because I'm going to use filters, I'm going to take this layer here, right click, and I'm going to, as you might guess, convert to a smart object. That way, all the stuff that I'm doing is going to be non-destructive, and I can go back and adjust it if I want. So with this layer here, which is a smart object, and it's filled with 50% gray, and it's overlay blending mode, let's see what happens if I go to filter, and I go to noise, and I say add noise. Hey, look at that. No problem at all. I'm able to add the noise to it. And you can see I filled it with a whole bunch of noise right there. We're now kind of adding it. So I'm trying to figure out, well, what's going to work here? What do I want to do? You probably want to add a bit more noise than you think you might need, and I'll show you why. We have two different methods here. The Gaussian noise tends to be harsher and more contrasty. See that? And so I don't tend to use that a whole lot, but it's there. There's my uniform. So maybe for now that looks okay. And I can also click monochromatic. There's the monochromatic noise, right? So the real question is, do I want monochromatic noise or do I want noise that has some color in with it as well? And so I'm going to try and look here at my noisy plate and see how that looks. It's because I'm trying to match this. So let's actually try this with the monochromatic noise and say, okay. Now it doesn't look so great right now, but notice that we've got the noise happening here, but it's also a bit softer. And this noise, by default, the add noise filter just makes this harsh, crunchy noise. So if you want to use things like film grain and add grain and things like that, you have more control. But what I'm going to do here with this is I'm just going to do a simple Gaussian blur on top of that. And I'm going to blur the noise. And so as I do that, now it's looking a lot better. Now this 1 pixel radius I think is a bit too much, so I'm going to take it down a bit here. Again, what I'm trying to do is I'm not trying to make this look noisy, but I am trying to make it match the plate here. That really is what I'm trying to do. So perhaps something like 0.5 radius on my pixels. Okay. And now I'm not sure I quite like what I have here. So here's the beauty of this being a smart object. I can go double click on my add noise, and I can say, well, let's do some color noise on that, and then maybe even take the amount down a little bit, something kind of like that right there. And you can see how I'd sort of lost that Gaussian blur filter. When I click OK, it blurs it back again. So what I'm trying to see is, does that help in putting some noise there to bring everything together? And as you're putting these elements together, you definitely want to look at the noise. Now I've zoomed into 200%, and you might want to go even to say 300%, but you want to really get a sense for what the noise looks like on that layer to try and match it with what we have right here. And so, as I'm doing that, maybe I'll go back to my add noise and crank it up. I did the Gaussian. What would that look like? That's not too bad there. Not too bad. Maybe just take that and take it one step down. All right, so that looks a little better. So I'm looking at the noise here, I'm looking at the noise here, I can see that that kind of matches. So there we go. So keep that in mind as you're putting these elements together, that you really want to check and match the noise from your various photographic plates. Now here's a big thing that you're always going to need to do. If you have any type of CG rendered element, you will definitely need to add some type of blur and some type of noise there, because those are not going to have any noise at all, and they're usually going to render out razor sharp and crisp, and they're not going to match the look of the plate. If you ever see any CG elements in a film and they really stand out and just don't look good, part of that can be poor CG, poorly textured, poorly rendered, but a big part is going to be the compositing of it. Has there been noise and blur added so that it matches the qualities of the photographic plate and doesn't stand out as something artificial and unreal compared to something you actually photographed through the lens of a camera? And that's what you're trying to do here. So really you want to do that at all times, I think, but especially you need to do that when you have any type of CG rendered element, whether it's 2D or 3D, and you're adding to your plate for compositing. Definitely going to need to do that. And so for a still image with Photoshop, this is how I like to do it with this method right here, putting the noise on its own layer, which again is going to be in overlay blend mode, filled with an overlay neutral or transparent color, which is 50% gray. And then because it's a smart object, any of my filtering is going to be non-destructive. And you can see how helpful that was as I kind of went back and forth to try to get it to match as well. And so you might also notice that often you see the noise in the darker areas and you don't see it quite so much there in the highlight areas. And so I can kind of see, how's that looking here? That looks pretty good. This noise right here in the background really does to me seem realistic. Like if this were photographed, especially if it was a bit out of focus, that would really work well. I'm looking at this edge right here. I'm looking at the value from foreground and background. I'm looking at the color and, of course, the noise. And this, to me, looks pretty good, pretty convincing. And so these are all things you need to keep in consideration as you're compositing these elements together. So remember, this can always be adjusted. I could look at that and think, well, maybe that's still a bit much. Double click on the add noise. Let's take it down to the next increment. There we go. How does that look? Right. Also kind of looking pretty good. As we go around here, perhaps even take the Gaussian blur, take it down just a tiny increment there as well. But that's the wonder of doing it this way and of having something that is so editable and non-destructive. Okay, now this is starting to come together and look pretty good, but I want to really make it sing, make it really work. And one thing you should know is that when you have a bright background, kind of a backlit type of thing here, and again, we're saying this is a light source, this sky, if they'd been photographed against this, we would probably see some light wrap, some of this color right here that's influencing or sort of wrapping around the edge. And the brighter it gets, the more we would see that. And this can be a bit of a stylistic choice. You can kind of do more or less depending upon just how realistic you want to be, or maybe kind of what kind of mood you want to set. But I think we definitely do need some of this. So what I'm going to do here is I'm going to take this background right here, and I'm just going to make a copy and drag it up and put it on top. Okay, so there we are, right on top. Okay, and notice how I'm not really worried about the adjustments I've made here, and we'll kind of see why in a moment. Okay, so if I take this, and once again I'm going to clip it down, so we can see that it's going to just appear where my foreground image is. But what I need to do is I need to make a mask for it. Now try to imagine what needs to happen is that it doesn't really matter what's happening around here because that's going to get clipped out, right? And I want to have it then sort of wrap or cover a bit of a distance right here and go over my subjects, but then kind of stop because we just kind of want it right along the edge. And again, how far it bleeds in from the edge, how bright it is, how soft the edge is, that's sort of up to you. And like I say, it really tends to be a stylistic choice. So what I'm going to do here is I'm going to load this mask as a selection. Okay, so we got that. We can see the marching ants there. Come to this layer and I'm going to add a mask. So we can see a bit there kind of along that edge. But what I really need to do is I need to take this and then probably invert it, right? Or I need to kind of figure out, what I want to do here. Yeah, I think I need to invert that because right now it's just showing up on the inside and not there. I really want to do this and kind of show you here what I'm talking about. So if I take this mask and I invert it, okay, so Command-I or Control-I on the PC, okay, there we go. I've inverted the mask. And so now we can't see it at all. It makes very little difference. Although if I turn it on, I can see a little bit happening there. But I want to take this mask and I want to kind of bleed it out here. In this case, I actually want to sort of to grow the mask. And this might be one of those few examples where I want to take the mask and expand the white out here. So I'm going to take this and come to my filter. And remember this, under other, there we go. Remember this maximum minimum. I'm going to take the maximum here. And what that's going to do is it's going to take that white and it's going to push it in. Aha, there we go. So this would be an example where I'm not using a mask in sort of the normal way, but I'm using it to give myself a bit of an edge here. Now, the squareness doesn't really produce very nice edges. So again, I'm going to probably try roundness, and then that gives me the option to have a bit more subtlety about what I'm doing. Well, you can see how as I take this radius, I'm taking the white and I'm growing it this way. So instead of the black, I'm taking the white in, and you can see it kind of creep over or encroach in over my foreground here. So as I go up, can you see it go more and more and more? Now this of course doesn't work at all. It looks awful, but it's getting me kind of where I need to go. This of course with the mask is going to be a bit of a destructive edit, but we'll figure this out and we can always try again. It's just a mask, right? We can always start over if it doesn't work. So look how much I'm coming in right there. And maybe I'll do a bit less, maybe something around 10 or 11. Well, maybe a bit closer to 10. All right. So we'll kind of go in like that. And how much you do this really is sort of dependent on just sort of the look you're going for, and you can play around with this and figure out what works. Now, it doesn't look great, but again, let me show you how this is going to help us out here. So if I can look at the mask, again, Option or Alt click to see the mask, okay? Now, this is a pretty kind of a harsh edge right there, but I can always take and fade that and soften it by going to my mask feather and now really cranking it up. You see that? Now that I've really brought it up here, I'm like 7.2 pixels, you can see how that's fading there. Now that's starting to look kind of interesting. You see that? Starting to look kind of interesting, as if this light here was sort of wrapping around. And again, that's, well, light wrap. So turn it off, turn it back on, turn it off, turn it back on. Now, it's really doing some stuff right here. Here's a big problem. Look how it gets dark. See that? Let's turn that off. All right. Now, we're not really going to have light wrap right here where there's no light. So the brightest parts here, where it's getting closer to white, this would give you some light wrap here. Then you have a bit less and a bit less, and it'd probably stop around here. So again, it's where your backlit or your background has a bright light source shining forward. That's going to give you the light wrap, and this part here would not. Well, so how can you take care of that? Generally, you're not going to want to use normal blending mode for a light wrap. You want to try a brightening one, right? Because it actually is light. See what's happening there? And so screen is a pretty common one. Look at that. There's screen, right? And so if I do screen, there's kind of a problem with screen in that, yeah, the brighter ones are brighter, but screen, if it's not pure black, is going to try and brighten everything. And so it does have kind of a nice look right there. I like that. But I think there's too much going on right here. And if your light wrap is too strong, it can make this edges look a little bit transparent. And we don't want the edge to look transparent. And see right there, it's almost like some of that edge is bleeding through. Now notice that I'm using the exact same background with the motion blurs on it. No matter what you do, you're going to want to take this background, even if it's not blurry, you're going to want to take it and give it some type of blur, because you don't want any distinction or details in here. You just want diffuse light. So screen, and then, color dodge, that gets some interesting stuff, but also you don't really want your light wrap to be brighter than your background. That's not quite going to work. So you see, that doesn't look quite realistic. It's way too much. And then, of course, linear dodge. The problem with color dodge is it's not going to look good against darker areas. If you have something that gets close to pure black, it won't show up at all. In this case, I think for the light wrap, I'm going to choose a blending mode that I don't usually use, and that is lighten. Okay, so look what lighten does. It's only going to appear where the colors on this layer are lighter than the colors beneath it. So notice that in my change from screen to lighten, I still get this bit of light popping in right there, but this part where the buildings are that's not very bright, that goes away completely. So this is actually not a bad way to go, is to use lighten. And it's looking better along here, along her face. You almost want some of these edges here to perhaps disappear into the light. It's actually really improved what's happening with her hair along this, because we don't want anything dark. And the hair is a tough thing to matte out. And we had some problems because it was a JPEG and it wasn't that nice of a quality along those edges. But look how that just really cleans it up and makes it look like it fits into the sky. And we have some really good stuff happening here. Look how this light just kind of wraps around there. So doing a lot of cool stuff. I think in this case, lighten is the way to go. You could also, if you wanted to use one of these other blending modes, you would maybe want to do a color adjustment here and then crank down these areas that aren't illuminated and make them closer to black so that they don't really interfere with stuff. Because again, remember, black is going to be transparent in any brightening blend mode. But in this case, this is a simple way to go. Lighten really gives me a good look right along here. I do like that. It's perhaps a bit too strong. See there along the edge? It's a bit too strong. So I would just take the opacity on this layer and just sort of take it down until it's somewhere where I like that. Okay? And so there's a 70%. And as I go around here, that does have a pretty good look. I mean, look around there. Also some nice kind of stuff happening right along here. And so what we're trying to do again is integrate these really illuminated parts into the edge of our subject and make it look like there's actually some nice wrap happening there. And if I turn that off, see, it's not quite as nice. If I turn that back on, we get these brighter parts that are really catching the highlights, almost disappearing into this backlit sky. And that's actually a good look there. So what do you do with it? Well, you have kind of your own choice here. Now you could say, well, this is too big of a light wrap, and you could change that. I'd probably start over maybe and then adjust how much of a maximum filter I did on that. Or if I think, well, this is kind of too soft and diffuse, this is what's wonderful about the feather on the mask. As I take that down, see how I'm getting kind of a harder edge right along in there. Oh, let's not move that. All right, so a harder edge right along in there. And so how definite of an edge you want with that light wrap is going to be controlled by how much you feather it. So what I would say is if you want a really hard, definite edge like that, you should have a very small light wrap, because this starts to look unnatural and weird. If it's kind of a bright and a hard edge and intense, it should be just a tiny bit near the edge. If you want to make it bigger, then you want to make it more diffuse like that. And it's kind of a stylistic choice, but no matter what, we want this to look natural and believable. And this more diffuse light wrap here can almost give you a little bit of a sort of a dreamy look right here along those edges there. But I'm thinking that something like that does look pretty good, and it's just a nice way to integrate the foreground and the background and bring it all together. So remember that basically the options that you have for it are going to be what blending mode you choose, what opacity you choose, how wide the light wrap is, and then again, of course, how much you feather it with the mask. So see how doing this with a mask is really great. There are other ways you could do a light wrap, but the nice thing with the mask is you have that control to feather the edge, and it is non-destructive, and you can just kind of fine-tune that. It is kind of possible that maybe I could go back on this mask, and if I wanted to kind of pull the black out again, instead of doing maximum, I could go up to the filter, and there's my filter, and then do the minimum, right? So minimum and maximum, we see what those do, and they really are designed to fine-tune the edge of a mask. And it becomes really handy for something like this. Obviously, the mask we want is not very precise at all. If I look at it, you can see how that's kind of what we're looking for. So usually an edge like this is going to give you that type of light wrap that you want. So we're using a very precise mask, right? Like that, for our actual image to mat out the background, and this softer mask right here, you see how it's inverted, to give that light wrap. Now let me mention one thing more about this whole light wrap situation. I'm noticing right here, we'll zoom in a bit, look at this edge, and we can kind of see how it's kind of getting where I want it to be right here, but sometimes it'll kind of bleed over here on the edge. And you don't want that on the edge, because see, there's really nothing that should be bleeding there. Her shoes are going off like that. So what's going on? Let's take a look at the mask and see. So I've got something happening here. Now I'm not really sure why this happens. Sometimes when you feather it, you can get things like that. But obviously we want to get this as dark and black and solid toward the edge as we can. So what I could do with this is, once again, my Polygonal Lasso. And I'm just going to make a selection right here. See that? And so if I then look at the mask and I fill that with black, there, that does pull it in quite a bit. That does make it look a bit better. Now there's still a bit of this happening right there. And that can happen because of this feather I have going. You can see that it's affecting that edge a little bit. And there's no option, say like in After Effects, to say not apply at the edge. It would be nice if we had that option here, but we don't. But that does improve it a little bit there. Now I'm going to mention one more thing that this whole light wrap layer could be useful for. So I'm going to take it, this whole layer here, and then a little Command or Control J to duplicate it. And this duplicate I'm going to kind of put underneath there. So again, this is my light wrap. Notice that when I did that, I got a really strong, intense light wrap here, which is kind of interesting, but way too much. Okay, so I'm going to turn this one off and show you what you can do here that's not really light wrap. If you still are a bit concerned about this color, like that you haven't quite gotten rid of that bit of blue along the edge, or something isn't quite right, you can take this light wrap and use it not so much as a light wrap, but as a color wrap to sort of take this background here and blend it into your foreground. And here's what I mean by that. I'm going to take this layer and change the blending mode and come down here to hue. And that's kind of wild there, huh? Let's go to color. Okay, that's much better. And so what's happening here is that this part here, the color of this background where the mask is allowing it, is actually overlaying here and tinting that a bit. Now that is too much, but can you see how it does kind of improve that just a little bit? Now if I take, of course, the opacity down, I can fine tune it to where it looks a lot better. I'm thinking maybe 40%. That sort of helps that. Is that right there? So that we have just a bit more of the matching of foreground and background here. So if there ever is a problem, and you don't necessarily always need to do this, but if you're ever kind of concerned about that, and I was really noticing it, kind of around here where it's really jumping out to me, you can always use that light wrap layer as a color layer and then sort of tint it just a little bit. And I might want to take that mask and kind of jump up the feathering there so we get some sort of nice diffuse bit happening just to kind of help out a little bit right along here. And then let's turn the light wrap back on top of that. There we go. And we can see what that's doing. But this can help a little bit if you're having any sort of concern about weird colors along the edge. And usually that's going to be your blue screen or your green screen that you haven't fully gotten rid of that despill. So again, just using a color blending mode on a duplicate of that light wrap layer can help out. Okay, so this is really looking good, getting close to being there. Just I think a couple more things we need to do to bring this all together. So to wrap this up, to give it the final finishing touches, I'm going to do a couple things here which might seem a little bit surprising. Now, remember all the things we've gone over regarding grain, matching grain, and all of that? Well, here's that grain layer once again. Now, I'm going to take this layer and actually duplicate it, and I'm going to put it on top of everything. So now what I've done is I've added just a bit of overall grain to everything uniformly. So let me zoom in here a little bit, and I'm thinking that is a bit too much, of course, but surprisingly, to help all your various elements really stick together, one compositing trick is to put a small layer of grain on top of everything. So I'm going to come here to my add noise. I think for this one I am going to put on monochromatic. I'm going to take it back to uniform, and so that makes it just a little bit gentler and lighter in there. So I'll say OK to that. And I'll kind of double check with this Gaussian blur and see what that does. And so I'm just kind of adding a tiny bit overall here. And so this does tend to sort of unify all these elements and make them look good together. Again, it's a bit of a stylistic choice, not something you have to do, but I want to show you just sort of what it can do here and let you know that is definitely an option and a technique that is used. So one more thing that I might do is look at the edges of this image as though it were actually filmed through a camera. When we do this type of work, we're not really going for 100% realism or if you were there, but it's more like what the camera would see. And so very often what you're going to have is a bit of vignette through the camera. That just helps it look a bit more cinematic and just a bit more like it's one photographed element. You want everything just to come together seamlessly, like you just happen to be there and you snapped a picture, as opposed to the meticulous combining of all these elements like we've done. So there are a couple ways you can do this. What I've done for a long time for this is I've made a new layer and filled that layer. And oddly enough, it doesn't really matter what you fill that layer with. So I fill it with whatever my foreground color happens to be. What I want to do is I'm going to put a layer style on this layer. And I want that to be seen, but I don't want the actual fill to be seen. And if you ever wondered what the difference is between opacity and fill, this is it. If I were to take the opacity of the layer down, it's still there, but it's, fully transparent. And if I were to add any effects to this layer, or anything like a filter or anything like that, it would be, of course, completely transparent as well. But if I keep the opacity up and take the fill down, now it looks the same. These pixels are transparent, but if I add an effect, that will be visible. And the effect that I'm going to try here is something that I like a lot. We don't want that. We're actually going to just use the effects down here. And I'm going to do an inner glow. So here's my inner glow. So inner glow, and let me show you what that's going to do. So of course, by default, it's going to be a bright color, which I don't want. I'm going to pick instead a dark color, maybe something like around here. That looks good. And in order to make it actually darker, I'm going to choose the blending mode of the glow, change that from screen to multiply. And take the size up about all the way like that. But I want to take the opacity down so it's just sort of barely there, like there's sort of 20%. So now you can see I've added just a little bit of a suggestion of a vignette around this image. If I turn that off, you can see how that's what it looks like right there. I just kind of darken those edges just a little bit. If that's a bit too much, I can always go in here and take that down a bit more, maybe like, I don't know, let's say 13%. So just a tiny bit of darkening on the edges. And what that does is it actually mimics the bit of a shadow you would get around the edges of the lens as the light is entering through it. So it's a vignette, it's a sort of a photographic artifact, and I'm artificially putting a photographic artifact here on this image to make it seem like it's just a photograph and not a composite. But there is another way you can do this, and it might be a little more accurate. I'm going to turn off this layer. And if we look here to our filters, we do have some lens correction ones. Perhaps I should keep that on so we can see that. So there's a lens correction. And with photographs, usually if there's a vignette, there's a correction to remove that. And that's often what photographers are trying to do, is trying to remove the vignette. And here we are, ironically, trying to add a vignette. But in the case of making something look more photographic, adding noise, adding a vignette, even adding a bit of light bloom, things usually you want to get rid of as a photographer, these are things we're artificially adding in. And that's sort of the point of compositing. So to show you how to make this work, it's actually going to be a bit of a similar process as what I used to make this layer with the noise or the grain. So what I'm going to do is I'm going to hold down Option or Alt, click on the New Layer button, and then what I get here is I'm going to change the mode because the vignette is darkening. I'm going to use multiply. And then, of course, I get with this neutral color, fill with neutral color, and it shows you what it is. That's cool. Again, I wish it would say fill with transparent color. That's a little more accurate, but maybe, for Adobe speak, they like that. So we have that right there. I'm going to say OK. And then just like with this process, I'm going to take this layer, right-click, and I'm going to convert to a smart object. That way I can apply a filter non-destructively. So what I'll do here, and again you can see that it's full of white pixels, and we know how that works now. If I go to my filter, look, there's that lens correction. So that's cool, that's still there. There's my lens correction. And this is going to pop up kind of its own little mini program right here. And auto correction, basically what that means is if you put in a particular lens and camera make, it's going to automatically adjust for the little weaknesses or sort of variations that that particular combination of camera and lens would have. There's the auto correction, and that's of course for high-end photography. We aren't doing that. We're going to do custom because again, I'm trying to put in this camera lens artifact sort of artificially. And we can see all these things here that it does, chromatic aberration, and as I mentioned, this is something that you might want to get rid of as a photographer. But as a compositor, this is the type of thing we might try and add back in. In this case, look, here's my vignette. And there's no vignette, of course. So if there were one in a photograph, you could take it to lighten it out. We're going to take this vignette amount and do a darkening on it. And look, there's that darkening. See? And so you can see how the brightest parts are in the middle and kind of near the edges of the film or the digital sensor, a bit less light is going to hit that, and so that's what gives you the vignette in a photograph. So I'll just say that looks all right, and we'll say okay. And look, there you go. There's the vignette, and perhaps a more sort of camera accurate vignette there. Now, if I'm thinking that's a bit too dark, and it probably is, we want the vignette to really not be noticeable. If you can see it, there's a bit of a problem. So I could always double click on this because it's a smart filter, and that's great. And so I could come to this vignette and take it up a little bit more toward the lighten. So there's our midpoint where it's not gonna do anything at all. We'll say okay. And now it's a bit lighter. And so just a little bit of a vignette there. This still might be a bit too much, so I could take it up just a bit, or I could even just take this layer right here and reduce the opacity of it just to where it starts to look good. So just a little bit of darkening on there on the edges just to simulate the idea of a vignette. And that's it. I believe our composite is done, and the end result looks pretty good. Now these are some very, very important techniques, and we've just seen them here in Photoshop applied to a still image, but the same approach, these same ideas would be used to do chroma key, composite, in anything else that it would use video, After Effects, or higher end programs like Nuke. You're going to be using the same types of concepts, dealing with blue spill along the edge, with matching the grain, with getting the blur right, with color correction values, even adding vignette and more grain. That's all going to apply to video compositing programs. So take these steps, these ideas here, and apply it to those. The tools will be different, but the concept will be the same. So hope this has been helpful for you in making your own really cool looking and convincing composites.